So that's kind of still a barrier for people. But there are a lot of people who are willing to say, actually, there's no reconstruction of Jesus that makes sense to me now. And it's the same problem that the original Christians had with Moses and Abraham and Homer. It's like those documents, the morals that they were teaching are like thousands of years old or hundreds of years old. They no longer speak to our current generation. So they rewrite, they create their gospels and have Jesus be the version that they want. We're now in the same place. Like the Jesus that's in the Gospels no longer resonates today. If you actually read the Gospels, he's kind of a dick. He's super moralistic. He doesn't really fit in. He doesn't have a lot to say to our current generation and the kind of moral struggles we're dealing with now. What we have now is that we've gone to a high reliance on fiction. So we have Star Trek, we have Star Wars, we have we have Harry Potter. We have Harry Potter's a good example. We have even Game of Thrones, where we have these fictional universes that explore moral problems and explore political problems and give us parables that we can use to teach, like, yeah, this is what a good person is like. This is what a bad person is like. This is what makes a good society. This is what makes a bad society. This is how you deal with this moral problem. This is how you not deal with this moral problem. We're now using fiction as models to do this. So we're doing it so effectively now that we don't need to believe they're true. We don't need to believe Harry Potter really existed to have to understand that there are valuable moral lessons in Harry Potter. And so, and that's what's happening now. So people are moving more towards looking at fiction as their source of their scriptures, and they're just no longer needing it to be literally true. They're no longer needing it to be inerrant, for example. And so that's the direction we're going. And I think in terms of like religious, like you lose this religious package, you lose this worldview, you lose your anchor in terms of your identity and your sense of where you fit in the world and how the world works and all of this. You do have to replace it. Like you've got to put something back in there, even to make sense of your life or the world, even to interact with the world. You have to make assumptions about it. And so that requires some replacement. And what it should be philosophy. We should go back from religion back to philosophy. The way the pagan intellectuals did is like they moved from these religious doctrines to philosophy. Philosophy was kind of like this formalization of, we're going to get rid of like this tradition and stuff and actually start asking questions about evidence-based, logic-based construction of a worldview. That's what philosophy was in antiquity. And it was a replacement for religion. It sometimes integrated religion, but it was really the replacement for religion. It wasn't scripture-based, it was philosophy-based. We need to do that again. But unlike antiquity, where philosophy was fundamental in the education system, it is not anymore. So philosophy is this fringe ivory tower doctrine, and even professional philosophers, are really cut off from the real world. They're not talking to the common people. They're not resonating with the common people. So you have this problem where we need the common people to really pursue philosophy the way they pursue their religion and use philosophy as, like, you can answer your own questions, you can dialogue with people, you can explore stuff, and you can build your own worldview, build this idea. You don't need a religious package to be sold you. You can construct your own. But you need the skills to do that. You need to even know that you're supposed to do that. It has to be something that has to be promoted. But we have not integrated that kind of technique, that philosophy, as a fundamental part of our culture. It's not something we're teaching our kids. It's not something that people are growing up with. And if they go and look at philosophy, say, oh, you need philosophy, and they go look at the ivory tower, and they go, what the hell is that? Like, that has nothing to do with what I need. They're not talking about the stuff that I want to deal with, and it's obscure and so on. So we've got this gap where we're not filling it, and we do need to fill that. And I don't know what the policy recommendation is for this, but there's something in terms of our culture. We do need to go there. Many people are finding that on their own, but not enough people. And what's happening is people are assembling worldviews unconsciously. So you get this political factionalization going on in the world today. So people are building worldviews based on mythologies. Like you look at libertarians or Sanders fans or whatever it is, pick any side of the political spectrum. They have a body of mythology that justifies their political beliefs. That mythology is often false stories or jiggered stories. It's just another religion, right? But they're falling into it happenstance, right? They're not thinking it through. It's not something that they're reasoning out. They're just ending up with these worldviews that get cobbled onto them. And I don't think that's healthy or productive. I think we need to teach people the skill to, you need to question everything and then figure out what holds up under questioning, and then build your own worldview out of that in a skilled, rational, evidence-based way. We're just not teaching people to do that, and we really should. We really should be promoting that.
There's a big transformation of consciousness that's concerned. And what all the myths have to deal with is transformation of consciousness. That you're thinking in this way, and you have now to think in that way.
Well, how is the consciousness transformed?
By the trials.
The test that the hero
Tests
undergoes.
or certain illuminating revelations. Trials and revelations are what it's all about.
Well, who in society today is making any heroic myth at all for us? Do movies do this? Do movies create hero myths?
I don't know. Now, my experience of movies, I mean, the significant experience I had of movies was when I was a boy, and they were all really movies. They weren't talkies, they were black and white movies. And I had a hero figure who meant something to me, and he served as a kind of model for myself in my physical character, and that was Douglas Fairbanks. I wanted to be a synthesis of Douglas Fairbanks and Leonardo da Vinci. That was my idea. But those were models, were roles that came to me.
Does a movie like Star Wars fill some of that need for the spiritual adventure, for the hero?
Oh, it's perfect. It does the cycle perfectly. It's not simple morality play. It has to do with the powers of life and their inflection through the action of man. One of the wonderful things I think about this adventure into space is that the narrator, the artist, the one thinking up the story, is in a field that is not covered by our own knowledges, you know. There was much of the adventure in the old stories is where they go into regions that no one's been in before. Well, we've now conquered the planet, so there are no empty spaces for the imagination to go forth and fight its own war, you know, with powers. And that was the first thing I felt there. There's a whole new realm for the imagination to open out and live its forms.
Do you, when you look at something like Star Wars, recognize some of the themes of the hero throughout mythology?
Well, I think that George Lucas was using standard mythological figures. The old man as the advisor. Well, specifically, what he made me think of is the Japanese sword master.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
I've known some of those people, and this man has a bit their character.
Well, there's something mythological, too, isn't there, in the sense that the hero is helped by this stranger who shows up and gives him some instrument, a sword or a sheaf of light, shaft of light.
He gives him not only a physical instrument, but a psychological commitment and a psychological center.
This time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
Well, he had him exercising with that strange weapon and then pulled the mask over. That's real Japanese stuff.
I'll take them myself.
When I took our two sons to see it, they did the same thing the audience did at that moment when the voice of Ben Kenobi says to Luke Skywalker in the climactic moment,
Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke.
the audience broke out into
They did.
elation, into applause.
Well, you see, this thing communicates. It is in a language that is talking to young people today, and that's marvelous.
So the hero goes for something. He doesn't just go along for the ride. He's not a mere adventurer.
Well, a serendipitous adventure can take place also. You know what the word serendipity comes from? It comes from the Sanskrit, serendripa, the Isle of Silk, which was formerly the name of Ceylon. And it's a story about a family that's just rambling on its way to Ceylon, and all these adventures take place. So you can have the serendipitous adventure as well.
Is the adventurer who takes that kind of trip a hero in the mythological
He
sense?
is ready for it. This is a very interesting thing about these mythological themes. The achievement of the hero is one that he is ready for, and it's really a manifestation of his character. And it's amusing the way in which the landscape and the conditions of the environment match the readiness of the hero. The adventure that he's ready for is the one that he gets.
Look, I ain't in this for your revolution, and I'm not in it for you, Princess. I expect to be well paid.
The mercenary, Solo, begins as a mercenary and ends up as a hero.
He was a very practical guy, a materialist in his character, at least as he thought of himself, but he was a compassionate human being at the same time and didn't know it. The adventure evoked a quality of his character that he hadn't known he possessed.
I love you.
I know.
He thinks he's an egoist, he really isn't. And that's a very lovable kind of human being, I think, and there are lots of them functioning beautifully in the world. They think they're working for themselves, very practical and all, but no, there's something else pushing them.
What did you think about the scene in the bar?
That's my favorite, not only in this piece, but of many, many pieces I've ever seen. Well, where you are is on the edge. You're about to embark into the outlying spaces. And
the real adventure out there.
A real adventure. This is the jumping off place. And there is where you meet people who've been out there, and they run the machines that go out there, and you haven't been there. It reminds me a little bit in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. The atmosphere before you start off the adventure. You're in a seaport, and there's old salt seamen who've been on the sea, and that's their world, and these are the space people also.
I got a bad feeling about this. The walls are
Don't just stand there, try and brace it with something.
But my favorite scene was when they were in the garbage compactor and the walls were closing in, and I thought, that's like the belly of the whale that Joe Campbell...
That's what it is. Yeah, that's where they were. They were down in the belly of the whale.
What's the mythological significance of the belly?
It's the descent into the dark. Jonah in the whale. I mean, that's a standard motif of going into the whale's belly and coming out again.
Why must the hero do that?
The whale represents the personification, you might say, of all that is in the unconscious. In reading these things psychologically, water is the unconscious. The creature in the water would be the dynamism of the unconscious, which is dangerous and powerful and has to be controlled by consciousness. The first stage in the hero adventure, when he starts off on adventure, is leaving the realm of light, which he controls and knows about, and moving toward the threshold. And it's at the threshold that the monster of the abyss comes to meet him. And then there are 2 or 3 results. One, the hero is cut to pieces and descends into the abyss in fragments to be resurrected. Or he may kill the dragon power, as Siegfried does when he kills the dragon, but then he tastes the dragon blood. That's say he has to assimilate that power. And when Siegfried has killed the dragon and tasted the blood, he hears the song of nature. He has transcended his humanity, you know, and associated himself with the powers of nature, which are the powers of our life, from which our mind removes us. You see, this thing up here, this consciousness thinks it's running the shop. It's a secondary organ. It's a secondary organ of a total human being, and it must not put itself in control. It must submit and serve the humanity of the body.
Join me, and I will complete your training.
When it does put itself in control, you get this father, the man who's gone over to the intellectual side.
I'll never join you! If you only knew the power of the dark side.
He isn't thinking or living in terms of humanity. He's living in terms of a system. And this is the threat to our lives. We all face it. We all operate in our society in relation to a system. Now, is the system going to eat you up and relieve you of your humanity? Or are you going to be able to use the system to human purposes?
Would the hero with 1,000 faces help us to answer that question about how to change the system so that we are not serving it?
I don't think it would help you to change the system, but it would help you to live in the system as a human being.
By doing what?
Well, like Luke Skywalker, not going over, but resisting its impersonal claims.
But I can hear someone out there in the audience saying, well, that's all well and good for the imagination of a George Lucas or for the scholarship of a Joseph Campbell, but that isn't what happens in my life.
You bet it does. If the person doesn't listen to the demands of his own spiritual and heart life and insists on a certain program, you're going to have a schizophrenic crack-up. The person has put himself off-center. He has aligned himself with a programmatic life, and it's not the one the body's interested in at all. And the world's full of people who have stopped listening to themselves. In my own life, I've had many opportunities to commit myself to a system and to go with it and to obey its requirements. My life has been that of a maverick. I would not submit.
You really believe that the creative spirit ranges on its own out there beyond the boundaries?
Yeah, I do.
Something of the hero in that. I don't mean to suggest that you see yourself as a hero.
No, I don't, but I see myself as a maverick.
So perhaps the hero lurks in each one of us when we don't know it.
Well, yes. I mean, our life evokes our character, and you find out more about yourself as you go on. And it's very nice to be able to put yourself in situations that will evoke your higher nature rather than your lower.
Give me an example.
I'll give you a story. I'm dealing with an Iroquois story right now. There's a motif that comes in American Indian stories very often, what I call the refusal of suitors. A girl with her mother lived in a wigwam on the edge of the village. She was a very handsome girl, but extremely proud, and would not accept any of the boys. They proposed to her through the mother, and the mother was terribly annoyed with her. Well, one day, they're out collecting wood, and they have gone a long way from the village. And while they are collecting the wood, a terrific darkness comes over them. Now, this wasn't the darkness of night descending. When you have a darkness like that, there's some magician at work somewhere. So the mother says, well, let's gather some bark and make a little wigwam, a bark wigwam for ourselves, and collect wood for a fire, and we'll just spend the night here. So they do that, and the mother falls asleep. And the girl looks, and there's this magnificent guy standing there with a wampum sash, glorious, and feathers, and all this kind of black feathers. He says, I've come to marry you, and I'll await your reply. She accepts the guy, and the mother accepts the man. And he gives the mother the wampum belt to prove that he's serious about all this. So he goes away with the girl. She has acquiesced. Mere human beings weren't good enough for her, but here's something that really, so she's in another domain. Now the adventure is marvelous. She goes with him to his village, and they enter his lodge. The people in there greet her, and she feels very comfortable about it and all. And then the next day, he says, I'm going off to hunt. So he leaves the lodge, and the door is closed with a flap. There's a flap. When he closes the flap, she hears a strange sound. So there's the whole day, and she's just in the hut. And as evening comes, she hears that strange sound again. And the door flap is flung off, And in comes this prodigious serpent with his tongue darting, and he puts his head in her lap and says, now you must search my head for lice and things like that. And she finds all kinds of horrible things there and kills them all. And then he withdraws, and in a moment, after the gate door has been closed, it opens again, and in he comes, the same beautiful young man again, and said, were you afraid of me when I came in just now? No, she said she wasn't at all afraid. Next day, he goes off to hunt. And then she leaves the lodge to gather wood. And the first thing she sees is an enormous serpent basking on the rocks. And then another, and then another. Then she begins to feel very badly, very homesick and discouraged. Then the evening, the serpent, and then the man again. The third day, when he leaves, she decides she's going to try to get out of this place. So she goes out, and she's standing in the woods thinking, and a voice speaks to her, and she turns, and there's a little old man there. And he says, darling, you are in trouble. The man that you've married is one of 7 brothers. They are great magicians. And like many people of this kind, their hearts are not in their bodies. There's a collection of 7 hearts in a bag that is hidden under the bed of the eldest to whom you are married. You must go get that, and then we'll deal with the next part of the adventure. She goes in and finds a bag of hearts and is running out, and the voice calls after her, stop, stop. It's the voice of the magician. And she continues to run. He says, you may think you can get away from me, but you never can. And just at that point, she hears the voice of the old man. He says, I'll help you, dear. And he's pulling her out of the water. She didn't even know that she was in water.
What does that say to you?
That's to say you have moved out of the hard land, the solid earth, and are in the field of the unconscious. And she had pulled herself into the transcendent realm and got caught in the negative powers of the abyss, and she's being rescued now by the upper powers. What you have done has been to elevate yourself out of the local field and put yourself in a field of higher power, higher danger, and are you going to be able to handle it? If you are not eligible for this place into which you put yourself, it's going to be a demon marriage. It's going to be a real mess. If you are eligible, it can be a glory that will give you a life that is yours in your own way.
So these stories of mythology are simply trying to express a truth that can't be grasped any other way.
It's the edge, the interface between what can be known and what is never to be discovered, because it is a mystery transcendent of all human research. The source of life. What is it? No one knows.
Why are stories important for getting at that?
Well, I think it's important to live life with a knowledge of its mystery and of your own mystery. And it gives life a new zest, a new balance, a new harmony to do this. I mean, therapy and psychological therapy, when people find out what it is that's ticking in them, they get straightened out. And what is it that life is? I find thinking in mythological terms has helped people. Visibly, you can see it happen.
How? What does it do?
It erases anxieties. It puts them in accord with the inevitables of their life, and they can see the positive values of what are the negative aspects of what is positive. It's whether you're going to say no to the serpent or yes to the serpent. As easy as that.